Ayan, good afternoon teachers. Magandang hapon po na isang mainit na hapon. And good afternoon Sir Jambi and good afternoon Sir Jello as well no for our session for today.
Good afternoon, Sir Franco, Sir Jello, and of course, good afternoon sa mga kaagapay natin. Pinaghalong excitement ba tayo ngayon, Sir Franco?
Yes, oo. Kaba at excitement yung session natin for today no. Well both on both ways on both ends no yung topic natin kasi ngayon ay talagang packed with learning content no things that we can learn about being a 21st century educator as well as yung mga speakers natin today are really no, perhaps two of the most brilliant minds pagdating sa learning design at saka sa education sa Pilipinas ngayon. They're actually paving innovations and programs in education. And just recently, by the way, no, what their programs, the ADL was actually held, no, awarded sa EduCampion, if I'm not mistaken. No? So congratulations as well. Advance, no? Di pa rin na-introduce sa ating mga speakers, pero congratulations on that award. That says a lot about how well they know 21st century education and how we can adapt no, to 21st century education. Sir Jello, kumusta? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon po. Good afternoon po sa lahat ng ating mga kaagapay. And yun nga, tulad ni Sir Jambi, Sir Franco, I'm really excited. Sabi nga, nung nakita ko pa lang, just to share, siguro Sir Jambi, Sir Franco, nakita ko pa lang nung mga names beforehand. Sabi ko, wow, this is something na we have to really look forward to as much as Sir Franco. Oo. Ay, wala pa akong audio.
Totoo ba? Ano?
Oo, parang ganun. Sabi ko, what? Kasi parang, alala ko, sabi ko nga kay Sir Franco noon, ito ng mga, nung nagsisimula pa lang, sabi ko, why not invite these brilliant people talagang, parang ito ng mga pangarap, na parang pangarap, ganun, pero now,
yes,
wow, I'm really
indeed,
excited.
no? Like a dream come true, sabi ko nga sa one of my posts in Facebook, a dream come true to have them here at KTS because there's so much they can actually share to our community. One of the speakers actually have been here already and shared a topic on GRR, gradual release of responsibility, which is also an equally great session. Okay, I think that was last January, when we opened 2021. Yes, isa sa mga favorite ko rin yan. Sobrang ganda ng topic na yan. Okay, anyway, so good afternoon teachers at magandang hapon po. No? And thank you for being with us here. Alam ko po, it's a Saturday, we're supposed to be resting. Okay, pero maraming salamat for being with us here at a usual and regular Saturday session. Okay? And of course, also our foreign audience, okay, good afternoon and welcome to our stream again. Okay, and teachers, okay, may we just request before we officially begin our session for today that you share our link to your social media account so that we can invite more educators this afternoon. Okay, so before we introduce our speakers, let's first talk about our topic for today. Okay, so this is our second installment of our November series on 21st century and post-pandemic education. Siyempre, advance tayo mag-isip, Sir Jambi, no? At Sir Jello. Hindi pa tatapos talaga yung pandemic. Okay? We're already preparing for it. Although, Sir Jambi, kaka-release lang, no? Meron ng IATF, I think, policy on allowing certain college, no, universities
yes,
to open up.
Nakita ko sa kahapon. Nag-send na rin yung school ng anak ko.
Yes, meron na. Yes, so very timely, no, that we actually start looking at, no, what would be our the education, no, post pandemic, no, and ano yung how do we go back and how do we adapt what we have learned for the last 2 years, no, and in a distance learning modality. And of course, kaya yung topic natin for today, no, on learning by refraction. Okay, I'm really excited about this, Sir Jambi, no, tsaka Sir Jello, because this is actually a collection of many researches that our two speakers have actually compiled and studied and analyzed, okay, and what in order to define, okay, what is a 21st century educator. And that, okay, if that doesn't excite you, I don't know what is, because that excites me to the bones, no, Sir Jambi and Sir Jel. Alam ni Sir Jambi yan, kagabi pa, no, hindi na ako makatulog. Actually, ilang araw na pala ako hindi nakatulog na maayos. So yan, so Sir Jambi and Sir Jello, let's not make our audience wait, no, and let's now introduce our first speaker for today. We're going to be having, no, two speakers for today. And they'll be talking about, again, 21st century education and what it means to be a 21st century educator. So let us first welcome our first speaker, Father Johnny Go, SJ. Sir Javi, let's do our introduction.
Okay, sure. As usual, pleasure for me, Sir Franco. Our first of two very special guests this afternoon is the founding dean of the newly established Gokongwei Brothers School of Education and Learning Design of the Ateneo de Manila University. He is also the basic education coordinator for the Jesuit Asia Pacific Conference, where he conducts teacher training and leadership development workshops in the region. Father Go teaches education at the School of Education and Learning Design, philosophy at the School of Humanities, and science, technology, and society at the College of Science of the University of the Philippines. His research interests include teacher epistemologies, critical thinking, religious education, Ignatian pedagogy, and the critical realist philosophy of the sciences. He received his EdDs from the UCL Institute of Education, University of London, and the Singapore National Institute of Education at the Nanyang Technological University. Father Go was previously the director of the Ateneo de Manila Institute for the Science and Art of Learning and Teaching, or the Ateneo SALT Institute. His professional career includes serving as the president of Xavier School San Juan and Nuvali from 2001 to 2012, and as executive director of the Jesuit Communications Foundation from 1997 to 2001. Father Go is best known for his award-winning weekly Bible blog, Pins of Light. He has published several books on faith and education and has composed a number of religious and inspirational songs. Ladies and gentlemen, mga kaagapay, please join me in welcoming with the warmest round of applause our first of two very special guests this afternoon, Father Johnny Sigo, SJ.
Maraming salamat. Thank you, Jambi. Thank you, Jello. And of course, thank you, Franco. No? I'm very happy to have been invited to give my thoughts to you this afternoon, to share my thoughts, and hopefully my thoughts, as well as my co-author Rita Atienza, will be able to provoke you into reflecting about the practice, no, that you're engaged in, your teaching practice. Actually, when I was invited to give this talk, I couldn't say no. No? The first reason, of course, is Franco, who is one of our best teachers in Xavier School. No, when I was there, I don't know now, no, Franco, baka nagbago ka na, pero during that time, he was really one of our best teachers, no, and I'm sure he's improved even more. The second reason is KTS. I've heard so much about the good work that KTS is doing, so I was more than happy to give my share, to make a contribution as well, no. So let me just share my screen, no. Okay.
So, yeah, Father, thank you so much again for spending your time here. So, good luck on your session, Father. Teachers, will be at the chat. If you have questions or concerns, let us know for this session. Good luck, Father.
Thank you, Franco. So this is my slide, no. So basically, Rita Atienza and I will be talking to you about our book, Learning by Refraction: A Practitioner's Guide to 21st Century Ignatian Pedagogy. Siguro nagtataka kayo, what's this Ignatian pedagogy? No, it's actually a way of learning and teaching that is really used by Jesuit schools. But what Rita and I found out when we were compiling this book together is that the principles of Ignatian pedagogy really apply, to any school, any educator who wants to follow 21st century learning principles. So what I hope to do is share with you some ideas, and so will Rita, Rita Atienza. And what we hope you will do is just pick out whatever you think will be helpful, and try to use it in your practice. And as Franco said, if you have questions or comments, feel free to type them in the comment section, and then we will go back to them during the Q&A. So first of all, as I said, we did write this book, Learning by Refraction: A Practitioner's Guide to 21st Century Ignatian Pedagogy. Rita and I agreed that maybe refraction would be a very good image or metaphor for the kind of learning that we want our students to engage in. No? You may know from your grade school science what refraction means. No, there are two meanings basically. The first is the bending and change of light, radio waves, etc., as it passes through a different medium. Kaya po when we're swimming or we're standing in a pool, no, our legs seem shorter, no, because the water is changing the waves of the light, no, so it refracts the light, no. But secondly, another meaning of refraction is what the eye doctor does whenever we visit the eye doctor, no, when the eye doctor measures the focusing characteristics of our eyes, no, to find out the grade for our spectacles or contact lenses. What the eye doctor does is he engages in the work of refraction. And Rita and I felt that these are two perfect metaphors for learning. No? A metaphor communicates to us what is at the heart of the idea, no? In this case, learning. How does refraction become an appropriate metaphor for learning? No? I'd like you to ask yourself, the way you're teaching now, the way your fellow teachers are teaching, whether you think this metaphor applies to them, no, and applies to you. The first one, of course, is the medium changes the light, no, and we thought this is a perfect image, no, for the kind of learning we want our students to be able to engage in, because we don't want our students to engage in 100% reflection. No? What's reflection? That's what a mirror does, right? The mirror reflects everything back to us 100%. So when we stand before the mirror reflects all the lights, all the colors, all the shapes 100%. Nothing is changed. But that's not the kind of learning we want our students to do. No? Maybe before, in a different era, before the 21st century, this kind of learning was perfectly acceptable as long as the student remembers every single thing that the textbook said or every single thing that the teacher said and returns everything in a perfect way, in a perfectly identical way. That's already considered learning. But today, based on the sciences of learning, we know that that's really more recall. That's not really learning. No, real learning is we want our students to wrestle with the ideas we give them, to change the ideas, no, to make the ideas their own. So we thought refraction would be a great image. No, the second image has something to do with the eye doctor, as I said. No, what does the eye doctor do when we visit the eye doctor? Yung mga nearsighted sa atin, mga may astigmatism sa atin, no, or farsighted, no, the eye doctor doesn't really know what the right grade is the moment he or she sees us, no? Rather, the eye doctor engages in a trial and error process, no? Sabi niya, can you read the fifth line, no? And then he or she will put the appropriate corrective lens, no? And then ask for our feedback. Is it clearer now with this or with that, no? Is it clearer now? Is it brighter? Is it dimmer? So we have to give them feedback, no? And after we give the eye doctor the feedback, the eye doctor will adjust the lens until finally the eye doctor will get it right. When you think about it, that's also the process we want our students to engage in, no? We don't want our students to feel like they're in a quiz show, na parang they just have to guess what the correct answer is. We want them to keep adjusting, no? We want them to keep revising their ideas, to try out their ideas, get our feedback, and improve their ideas, no? So in this manner, we're teaching them not only knowledge, we're teaching them to think, no? Because what is thinking but the trial and error process of improving your ideas, di ba? So those are the two metaphors, no? The two meanings of refraction. So siguro ang magandang tanong dito is, would you say that you're doing a little bit of both, no? Are you encouraging your students to change whatever you're lecturing about, whatever they're reading about? Or are you already content with them giving back to you exactly what they read or got from your lecture, no? And secondly, do you give the opportunity for your students to improve their ideas or their writings, no? What's a common practice in English or Filipino or other language skills is we ask our students to write a paragraph or two, and then we give them feedback and we ask them to come up with a revision, no? That would be a good example of refraction in the second sense, no? So for us, we feel that these two metaphors capture what 21st century learning is all about, no? Because in the 21st century, learning has been redefined, no? It used to be, no, that learning was all about recalling and mastering the content, no? But today, that's not enough anymore. Of course, learning still entails recall. If you don't remember the content, no, it's not so bad now because we can always Google, no. But it's still important to remember a little bit of it. But there are two ingredients in 21st century learning. The first is understanding of content, and the second is the application of learning. So they have to understand, no, and they'll only understand after trial and error, after they make it their own, no, if they refract the content, and also if they apply it in real life, no. So I'm going to focus more on the first one, understanding of content, no. But as you can see, siguro I think in the majority of our classes, majority of our teachers, not because of their fault, it's not their fault, no. But I think most of us educators are somehow stuck in learning as we call our mastery of content. And again, it's not the teacher's fault because sometimes our curriculum is too much, no. There's too much to cover given a quarter or a term, no. So the easiest way is to really just lecture and make sure our students remember, no. But for those of us who want to be creative, for those of us who want to be innovative, for those of us who want to be more 21st century and more effective as teachers, no, even if there are constraints in our curriculum, in the class hours, we can find ways and opportunities to make a pivot, no, to change. Parang nangyari sa atin during the pandemic, no. We were not 100% prepared for remote learning or teaching, but we had to. Many teachers heroically stepped up, no, to do that. And I think even if there are a lot of obstacles and constraints in Philippine education, if we have the will, we can find ways and means of promoting the 21st century kind of learning. Okay, so what kind of shifts do we need to make? No, so the main question here is, how do we design learning for understanding and application? It's now the 21st century education is really more about learning design. No, in short, the teacher's job is not so much to produce learning because that doesn't happen. No, the teacher's job is to design the learning, design the unit plans, the lesson plans, and the classroom environment, whether online or face to face, no, and hopefully facilitate learning, no. So this series is about going back to the new normal, no, the next normal, which many people also call the next possible, no. What else is possible now, no? What I'd like to say is that all these principles for 21st century learning are very applicable online and remote, but they are just as applicable face to face. In fact, we tell our colleagues all the time, if you learn how to design learning online or remotely, we are pretty sure the way you teach when we go back to face, you will become even more effective. No? So it's the same principles, okay? So there are several shifts that we educators need to make, no? And I'd like to talk about some of them, and my co-author Rita will talk about the others. No? At ang magandang tanong, a good question to ask yourself is, where are you in these desired shifts? No? Are you able to already complete the shift? No? Or are you willing to make these shifts? Are you able to think of baby steps for you to make these shifts? Okay. So the first one is, what is very clear is we need a teacher makeover. No? Parang si Vicky Bello, di ba? You send yourself or someone to Vicky Bello to get improved, no, the way the person looks. So but we teachers ourselves, we don't need to go to Vicky Bello, but we need to improve how we look. Meron before and after, no. Yeah, I know the after picture here is not so pretty, but at least it's an improvement, no. And that's really what this is all about. We're not after perfection, no. We're after progress. As long as we are progressing and improving our practice, even if we're not yet perfect, that's fine. That was our experience last year with the pandemic. A lot of teachers were afraid to do a makeover in terms of online learning and teaching. But we kept assuring them, never mind if it's not perfect, as long as you're growing and you're progressing. So it's the same here. No? So there are three traditional roles of the teacher that we take for granted. The most obvious one is the expert. Of course, we have here Albert Einstein, no? A genius scientist. No? Many teachers feel the pressure to be an expert. No? And expertise is important, obviously. If I know nothing about my subject area, my course, I can't give too much to my students. No, many teachers I know are forced to teach subjects they are not really prepared for, but at least they are one page ahead of their students. No, maybe they're just preparing the day before the class. That's okay. No, at least your expertise is still more than your students. No, the problem, however, with the role of the expert is that today, with technology, with the internet, especially with Google, being an expert in the classroom is not so crucial anymore because the students can just ask Google. In fact, there's a saying back in Xavier School. I remember I used to tell the teachers, If the students can Google it, there's no point teaching it, because they can just go to their devices and Google it. No, the teacher is for something else. If all you're gonna be is an expert in the classroom, you can become irrelevant because Google is a better expert than you are. No, so being an expert is helpful, but it's not so important anymore today in the 21st century. No. Secondly, to be a performer, some of my favorite teachers are the most entertaining teachers. No, they will make you laugh. No, they will make you cry even talking about the life stories. No, we were very engaged. No, but at the same time, we know that today we cannot compete with technology. No, entertainment is so much more effective and successful in the internet rather than the classroom. No? And studies have shown that if we want to engage our students, we don't need to be funny or a great performer. No, that's not really what it's all about. It's all about design, the way we design our courses and the way we design our environment. No, so that's the second traditional role of the teacher. The third one is what we would call the terror teachers, yung mga inspector. No, they're always inspecting our work. No, and they want to make sure that quality control is really high. No, and some of our favorite teachers were inspectors. Some of them were performers. Some of them were experts. And being an expert performer inspector really worked before, but today they're not so crucial anymore. No, they're not so crucial anymore. Um, the impact on learners, no, of these roles are also not so ideal. No, so the one big idea I'd like to relate to you at the outset is the role we assume in the classroom sends a cue to our students on what role they should play. So if you're an expert, you're telling your students this is what you should be. Performer the same, inspector the same. So let's examine what's the impact on the learners by playing these three traditional roles. Well, obviously, if you're an expert, basically you expect your students to be a sponge. No? All they have to do is absorb everything you've said, absorb everything you said in the lecture, absorb everything in the textbooks that you require. As long as they're able to absorb it, they're the best learners in your class. No? So what are they doing? They're just being passive. They're just recipients of your knowledge. No? And that's not the best way to learn. The sciences of learning tell us that's not a very effective way to learn if they're very passive. No? If you're a performer, obviously, what happens to your students? They become spectators only. No? They enjoy the class. If you're a very good performer, no, they're touched by the words you're saying. But again, they're not doing much. No, they're just like like a couch potato. No, parang they're just watching TV. They're not really engaged. No, and as we know today, young people and also adults, that's not how we want to be entertained anymore. Before, it's okay to be entertained by just watching. No, by one-way broadcast. We're just sitting in the couch and watching what's on TV. But now we want to interact. No, we want to interact with the show. That's why the internet is good, because we can click, we can comment, we can like, no, we can click another link and learn more about this and that. No, so again, if you're playing the role of a performer, your students are all enjoying, but they're just spectators. They're also very passive. No, and finally, if you're an inspector, it's all about quality control. So your students are scared of you because they're terrified of failing. No, but they really feel they're just a product. No? They just have to show you what they've learned from your class. No? And that's also not the ideal role for learners. Another big idea in 21st century learning is the more active and engaged our students are, the more effective is their learning. No? So these three roles do not encourage the learners to be active. No? So what would be the three 21st century roles of the teacher? So I'd like you to ask yourself, are you able to perform these new roles, no? Instead of just being expert, performer, and inspector? The first one I've already talked about, being a designer. No? Today, I think the most important role of the teacher is to be a designer. No? In short, it's not just about telling students what you know, hoping they'll memorize it. It's about you asking about how can you give opportunities to your students to learn better. No? What are the different strategies I can use? No? What are the different tactics I can offer? No? What are the different activities or tasks I can ask them to engage in so that they will learn? No? So, for example, if you want to teach your students how to play basketball, obviously, you're not going to ask them to just listen to a lecture, right? You want them to actually play the game. So, in the same sense, if you want them to learn science, if you want them to do literature, if you want them to learn history or math, you don't want them to just listen to the lecture. You want them to do science, to do history, to do math. No? In short, how will you design the class hours? Or if it's an online program, how do you design the task online so that the students can actually do what they're supposed to do to learn whatever you want them to learn? So designing is such an important art for education today. No? The second one is to be a facilitator. No? We cannot force our students to learn. No? We can only bring about the conditions that will encourage them to learn. No? You know that saying, no, we can lead the horse, but we cannot force the horse to drink the water. No? The same thing with our students. We can, dump content on them. We can assign so many requirements, but they're not going to learn unless they give their consent, unless they give their permission. So the job of the teacher is to facilitate so that the students will give their consent and actually learn. No? And the third one is to be a coach. No? What does a coach do? A coach gives feedback to the athletes, no? But also is a cheerleader. No? Cheers them on, make sure that their morale is high, that they don't give up. In this pandemic, we knew that the mental wellness of our students was very crucial. No? So in many ways, in my classes in UP and Ateneo, many times I found myself, expressing support for them, encouraging them, cheering them on, and saying, just relax, don't be so anxious. That's part of the job, no? But also in what they're learning, to give them feedback so that they will improve their performances. Okay, so these are the three roles, the three new roles, no? And they also have their impact on learners, no? Just as being an expert, performer, and inspector sends a message to students to be passive, the designer, the facilitator, and the coach sends a message to the students to be more active learners. No, let's go through each one of them. So a designer, no, you're designing learning experiences and learning environments, and you design them in such a way that your learners will become inquirers. No, that they will, they will be engaged, they will be curious, and they will do whatever they need to do to learn. No, so you're not just force feeding them or spoon feeding them. You know? So that's what happens when you play the role of the designer. You know? If you play the role of the facilitator so that your students will make connections and construct, another way of putting this is your facilitator of refraction. You want your students to refract the ideas. No? The learner becomes a person who really is the meaning maker. No? He or she's the one constructing the meaning or their understanding, no, of the ideas. No? And that's exactly how learning happens. No? The learners have to be active. They have to put ideas together, wrestle with them, pull them apart, and synthesize them and make them their own. In a word, the learner must refract the content that you offer them. Okay? And finally, as the coach, you are a coach of transfer and application. You want them to transfer their learning in the real world. You want them to use their learning in the real world to apply them. No? So the learner becomes a creator. So, dear colleagues, as you can see, no, just by looking at our own roles, a lot can happen already. No? If we try to assume the roles of the designer, the facilitator, and creator, we are going to encourage our students to be more engaged, to be more active. No? So these are the three shifts, no? Because we want to shift to being a designer from an expert to designer, because we want our students not only to be a sponge but inquirer. We make the shift from performer to facilitator because we want our students to be meaning makers and not just spectators. No? And finally, from being inspectors, we want to be the coach, the guide on the side, so that our students will become real creators. So they will use their knowledge and apply it in the real world instead of just being passive products. No? So a good question to ask, really, my dear colleagues, is where are you in this journey? You know, the journey from being an expert to designer, the journey from being performer to facilitator, and the journey from being, an inspector to a coach. No? So each of us is on a different journey. What's important is to know where we are and to also know which direction we should be headed for. No? And it's up to us to think of baby steps on how we can make the three shifts. Okay, so this is all about designing learning. That's the main task now of the teacher. So let's examine our roles from the traditional roles to the 21st century roles, and let's move away from the paradigm that it's our job to produce learning. We cannot produce learning, no matter how much of an expert, performer, inspector, designer, facilitator, coach you are. You cannot produce learning. You can only design learning and create opportunities and encourage your students to learn. No? So this is the old paradigm, the traditional paradigm to produce learning. No? It's a very naive paradigm because we can't do that. No? The teacher as the primary or only cause of learning. No? We know that that's not true. There are many causes for learning. No? Now it's all about designing the learning, no? So that we set the conditions, no? So that the student is the primary cause of learning. Our job is only to create the conditions and opportunities so that they will make the decision to actually learn. Okay? So to design the conditions that may lead to learning, that's our main job today. No? So in summary, I just want to say that I think what's important here is that these are very simple frameworks, but I think they're helpful. They can help you sort of examine your own practice as well. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to give the virtual floor to Rita Atienza, who's my co-author in Learning by Refraction. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Father Johnny, for that introduction to learning by refraction. We'll now proceed to our second speaker. We'll have Father Johnny once again later during our panel discussion to answer some of your queries or your questions for this afternoon. Okay, Sir Jambi?
Ayan. Again, pleasure is mine, Sir Franco. I, I hope naririnig ako.
Yes, we can hear you, Sir Jambi.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Franco. We, of course, have another very special guest this afternoon, mga kaagapay. She is the director of the Ateneo Teacher Center and has served as the Ateneo Salt Institute's coordinator for teacher education and professional development. She is currently a faculty member of the Ateneo de Manila University's Gokongwei Brothers School of Education and Learning Design and teaches in the masteral program of the university's Department of Curriculum, Pedagogy, and Assessment under the Gokongwei Brothers School of Education and Learning Design. She is also currently curriculum and instruction design consultant to Xavier School San Juan and Assumption College San Lorenzo. She is an experienced teacher trainer and a seasoned curriculum consultant with a strong background in understanding by design, the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm, project based learning in the Philippine context, curriculum development, and instructional design for deeper understanding. She is in an ongoing pursuit to explore how we can transform education to better prepare students for a complex and unknown future. She holds an MA in education from the Ateneo de Manila University and an undergraduate degree in math from the University of the Philippines. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, mga kaagapay, samahan niyo po ako by welcoming her with the warmest round of applause, Miss Rita Atienza.
Welcome
Maram.
back and good afternoon, Miss Rita.
Good afternoon, Franco. Thank you for inviting me back. Magandang hapon po. Salamat, Sir Jambi, for the kind introduction. I'm glad to be here again. It seems parang layo-layo na nung January, no? Pero actually, ang bilis-bilis ng panahon. Pasko na. So anyway, I'm glad to be here again with all of you. And this time with Father Johnny, who together we co-authored the book, Learning by Refraction. And it's really something we believe in and are very excited to share with you. Okay. So I will, as Father said, I will pick up where he left off. And we're still talking about shifts in thinking that all of us have to make, no? And I know that when Franco introduced this topic this afternoon, he was talking about this new shift that is coming. It's of course from online or remote to maybe hybrid learning, high flex learning, I think is what some of us know it as. But whatever it is, may change na naman, may adjustment na naman lahat tayo, and may period of upheaval na naman. This talk, Father Johnny's and my talk, it's not about how to move from that remote to face-to-face instruction slowly, no, that it's not about the steps to doing that. But I think it's even more important as a background because in talking about course design and the kinds of shifts of thinking to make learning more effective, these are the things I think that can guide you. Magpalit-palit man yung mga platform na that we find ourselves in, we, you know, sometimes we will feel lost. Kunyari daw, mahuli ng konti yung DepEd in giving a new kind of milks, kung sakali man may ganon, or new kinds of guidelines. Yung iba sa atin, nawawala na, ano nang gagawin natin? But if we're thinking about these kinds of shifts, in thinking about effective teaching for this century, then this can guide us. Okay, so I will continue where Father left off, and I'd like to talk about one kind of shift in our book that we really discussed at length, and it's about learning for action and learning through action. Okay. Father explained that teachers need to have a makeover. And if you can see the slide, the picture I put there, the teacher before makeover, bagay na bagay yan sa face-to-face instruction. Well, not really bagay kasi in fact, a lot of those students might just be waiting for the bell to ring. And a lot of them might not really be learning. Maybe they'll magpapatutor yan sa guardian or parents or kuya, ate, right before the test just to be able to pass because the teacher was just the expert maybe or the entertainer or the inspector, and they didn't really learn because they were very passive, as Father said. And instead, we would like to go to have a makeover. And if you can see this teacher, after the makeover, her classroom has changed, no? First of all, tumanda na yung mga bata. No? Just kidding, yun yung graphics na nakita ko. Na. Anyway, no, but this shows that the students are very involved in their teaching, in their learning. The students themselves are working, they're making meaning, as Father explained. They are creating, they're doing, they're collaborating, and you almost cannot tell who the teacher is there. Okay? So, inangat ko ng konti yung teacher sa likod para ma-recognize natin. Pero kung ikaw yung principal, papasok ka sa classroom na to, mahihirapan ka maghanap saan ba yung teacher. Kasi yung teacher talagang guide on the side, talagang nagko-coach sa mga estudyante. Nandun siya, in-explain na niya yung topic, tapos hindi lagi siya yung nasa center, hindi lang siya lagi yung bida. Binigyan niya ng maybe a meaning-making task yung mga bata, mga estudyante niya. At ngayon, umiikot siya para tulungan sila, i-coach sila, i-guide sila. In fact, Tony Wagner said that learning right now, next slide please, Sir Franco, knowledge is ubiquitous, meaning it's everywhere. Wherever we go, we can find information. And it's constantly changing, growing exponentially. So even if we try, even if you take your PhD now, finish it, expert, ang dami mo nang alam tungkol sa topic, siguro in a few months, nadagdagan na yan. Hindi mo, it's so hard to keep track of everything. Today, knowledge is free. It's like air. It's like water. It's become a commodity. There's no competitive advantage today in knowing more than the person next to you. So kung knowledge lang, walang competitive advantage yon. Kasi yung katabi mo, pwede rin siyang mag-Google, di ba? So the world doesn't care what you know. What the world cares about is what you can do with what you know. Okay, marami kang ang alam. Paano mo gagamitin ito? Can you think creatively with the things you know? Can you think critically? Can you communicate it to others? And so on, right? So, next slide, please. There are 3 mindset shifts that this parallels very much the roles that Father explained to you earlier. It also um, um, speaks about certain characteristics of the teacher before makeover, right? So one shift we need to make is instead of only thinking about what should I teach? So bagong lesson ko next week, ano ang ituturo ko? Kailangan ang thinking natin about that as we approach unit design or lesson design is not what should I teach, but what should my students learn? Okay? So from the very start pa lang, hindi na teacher-centered ang pag-iisip mo. Ang pag-iisip mo, student-centered na. Kailangan sila matuto nito. Ano yun? Right away yun, ang kasunod na yun is, paano ko yun maituturo para talagang matutunan nila, di ba? So that is a very powerful shift. Shifting from just being teacher-centered to learner-centered. Number two, instead of always thinking, what knowledge and skills should I cover? So, what should I cover? Anong gagawin mo? Tingnan mo yung textbook, yung table of contents. Anong i-cover ko dito? O kaya syllabus, ano yung i-cover ko dito? O MELCs. So again, you're being very teacher-centered and you're being very textbook-driven or syllabus-driven. And if you are the kind of teacher who's already being made over and you're thinking, what should my students learn? Ang kasunod dyan is what important concepts should my students explore, di ba? Meaning making. So ano yung meaning making na kailangan gawin ng mga estudyante ko, right? And then the third shift is from being test-oriented, meaning what knowledge and skills should I test them on? So yun yung preoccupation mo, anong itetest ko sa kanila, di ba? And instead, we're saying shift to thinking, what actions should my students be able to do? So shift from test-oriented to action-oriented. So imbes nang iisipin natin, I have to kailangan maturo ko ito kasi nasa test siya, ang shift of thinking natin is kailangan maturo ko ito kasi kailangan nila ito sa next grade level o kaya sa daily life nila or when they graduate, di ba? So those are the three very, very important shifts in thinking that we are talking about. Next slide, please. So what we would like to emphasize in learning by refraction is that learning is for action. Learning is not for the test. Learning is not covering just a textbook. Learning is not for the teacher to finish the syllabus. Learning is for the students to start deeply understanding the concepts so that they can actually apply it. So learning is for action. Okay? So this mindset shift is sort of telling us, giving us a new definition of learning. Father already alluded to this when he talked about hindi pwedeng mirror reflection lang. Kailangan refracted. In other words, pumasok na sa utak natin, pre-process na natin. Paglabas, we have assimilated it, we can apply it, we understand it, maybe we have added to it in our mind, add additional insights, and so on. So the ultimate aim of education for us is to be able to transfer learning to the real world. So not just pang classroom, but sana transfer it when we need it to the outside world, right? The other way of saying it is wise use of content in a certain context. So, ituturo mo yung content sa classroom. Well and good, you already do that now. But what many of us might not be doing is teaching them how to use this content wisely, meaning strategically, depending on the context, right? So Father mentioned the example earlier about basketball player. Okay, so a player may know the skills needed to be a very good basketball player. Magaling siya mag-dribble, mag-pass, etc. But will he be able to use what he knows wisely when he has to make a split-second decision when there's 1 minute left in the game and they are tied? So, strategic na ang pag-iisip dapat niya. Okay, yung content, alam niya. Pero, paano niya gagamitin yung content na alam niya, di ba? Strategic, kanino ko ipapass? Ano ba yung pinakamabuting dribble until the whatever time ends? Lahat yon kinakalculate niya. So, wisely, strategically, right? He'll read the conditions in the court, how far from the goal, who's positioned where. So it's a very complex, messy situation. In this particular context, will he be able to use what he knows wisely? And of course, work as a team para manalo sila, di ba? So, can your students use the content that you teach wisely and effectively depending on the context, right? So that's why learning for action is a key concept of learning by refraction, refractive learning, our book, right? And so when you're designing a unit, how you start thinking, what should my students learn? What actions should my students be able to do? Okay, so let's take an example, right? So let's say you are preparing a unit in math about fractions, right? So teacher, before makeover, will be planning his or her lessons with these cognitive objectives. Usually, of course, with an affective objective also, but teacher before makeover has objectives such as this. Very good. And you know how to make smart objectives. They're behavioral, they're measurable, etc. And for example, expresses one fraction as a fraction of another given their ratio and vice versa, defines and illustrates the meaning of ratio and proportion, and so on. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, but the teacher should be thinking now, what is this for? What should my students be able to do? The previous slide, please, Franco. What should my students be able to do with this information? So, for example, will they be able to read an infographic? Ngayon, ang dami ng data about how imagine here, 16 out of every 100 checks constantly their social media, etc., right? So, sana, when your students learn ratio and proportion, iisipin ni teacher, if you are teacher after makeover, iisipin mo na, saan nila ito gagamitin? Sana maka-interpret sila ng infographic. Next slide, please. Or maybe when they read about news items, they will also be able to look at it, right? So this one, number of active cases is not a ratio, it's not a fraction, 175,000 dati pa to, beginning of October pa to, 0.06%. Okay, anong ibig sabihin yan? For example, ganyan. So, all of this sana magagamit ng estudyante yung kaalaman nila tungkol sa ratio and proportion para pag nagbabasa sila ng news, pag nakakita sila ng mga data, they will be able to make sense of it. All right? So teacher after makeover will think, aha, I know why my unit is important to my students. Next slide, please. So that they can make sense of real-world data. So keeping this in mind, magpapalit na ngayon ang kanyang pagtuturo. Kasi now, it won't just be worksheets kasi meron kang ibang goal, right? So that they can make sense of real-world data. At saka, magkakaroon ka na ng idea for performance task. So your performance task is going to be based on some kind of real-world action that you have been thinking of from the beginning. And it is really so because you are making the mindset shift of learning is for action. All right, next slide, please. All right. So we move now to what about learning through action? Okay. So you're thinking of your performance task, right? I mentioned that. You're thinking that I want my students to learn ratio and proportion. Why? What real world application? What action makes sense of real world data, di ba po? Okay. So, paano ngayon yon? Ano ang steps? What does this mean now? So, we are in the book also advocating for 3 shifts. First, think of application now instead of application in the project that I will give them at the end of the lesson. So, pagplano pa lang, iniisip na natin, what is the application and how can we make them apply it during the unit? Okay, next slide, please. So, instead of just giving them things like worksheets, quizzes, a lot of problem assignments, and then iisipin natin. Kasi para ma-apply nila, someday ma-apply nila yan. Pero it's like, kung swertahin ka na matandaan pa nila after your quiz, one day they will be able to apply it. So kailangan, application now is saying if we really want to be able to make sense of real world data, then we have to think of that performance task and start spelling out what that performance task will look like. Perhaps it will be something like this. So, okay, this is what I'm going to make them investigate this relevant issue, okay? For example, of all your waking hours in 1 week, how much of that week of your waking hours is spent on media and screen entertainment? And at this rate, okay, so kunyari daw yung rate, so many hours per week ang madiscover mo sa investigation, right? Sa mga estudyante. At this rate, how much of 1 whole year is spent on media and screen entertainment? Are you happy with this? Why or why not? So did you find out that 50% of your waking hours is spent on screen time for entertainment? O happy ka ba doon? Paano mo babawasan? Anong magandang ratio? Etc. Okay? So, another, if we are thinking of the COVID, kunyari yun yung application na mas gusto mo, then what you can do is tell them, do a sweep. In other words, look at all the data, numbers, tables, graphs, infographics on a given day on your Facebook feed, social media, news, TV. Choose a few that are relevant to you and make sense of the numbers to see if there's enough evidence to support their claims, like the percentage of COVID that was in the news there, right? So do the math and see, tama ba, may ebidensya ba sila? So that's why application now is important. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Franco. I think I deleted some slides and it's not showing. Okay, so here you can see this student is writing, even if the student has so many misspelled words. Because spelling is a different lesson. This lesson, the teacher wanted the student to develop their identities as writers and enjoy the act of expressing themselves in writing. So if the action goal is for your students to become inspired to write, And to why not make them apply it now? Bakit natin hihintayin na magaling na silang sumulat ng sentence, magaling na sila mag-spell bago pa tayo iisip ng project na kunyari make a book, right? So this is a project that has actually been done by many teachers, and they produced many good writers because their students don't get turned off. If you start writing as a little girl or boy, and then the teacher has so many red marks, wrong spelling, ayaw mo na maging writer. Sayang naman, di ba? Creativity and our identities as writers, that's what we want to develop. Okay, next slide, please. The next is, instead of out of context application, we need to think about in context application. Right? Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so the worksheets with the problems on ratio and proportion, those are important. We're not saying they're not important, but they are out of context. Diba? So pag inisip natin, pag sinosolve ng mga bata ang problems na tulad nito, parang they're just doing it. They're just applying the theorem, they're just applying the formulas, but that's all. They're not making sense of it with respect to a real world situation. Ang comparison dito is parang yung mga basketball player na pinag-uusapan ko kanina, wala silang ginawa kundi mag-practice lang mag-dribble, mag-practice lang mag-pass, free throw lang, ganyan. Di ang galing-galing na nila. Pero never sila nag-practice sa korte in a game, right? So what will happen to them if they really play a basketball game when all they did was out of context application? So next slide, please. If we're thinking about in context application, then we need to have them apply it using real world data. Next slide, please. So for example, what I told you earlier about how much time do they spend on the screen, that's real world, and that's really relevant. That's their time. That's their life, right? And that will be useful to them, right? So now they're thinking of ratio and proportion. So paano sila magko-compute? Siyempre, iba yung screen time ng isang bata, iba yung screen time ng kaklase niya, iba yung mga condition. So they're now going to think of how will I apply ratio and proportion for their different contexts, right? Next slide, please. So when you give them this kind of application, this is in context, and there's a greater chance that they will not forget ratio and proportion because they used it this way. What is more, they will understand it more deeply, right? Next slide. This is, next slide, please, Franco. This is the example that I was telling you earlier, okay? So this is an example where, wait, just a minute, something's going on. Sorry. Okay, so this is in a grade 2 classroom, and it was about book reading skills, how to use the book, what are the parts of the book. And what the teacher did here was she made them always read a book aloud to the class. And what happened here was the students learned this so well that they would video themselves take a selfie. Tapos na yung lesson nito, pinapadala pa nila sa teachers yung mga selfie nila reading a book. At saka nakakaaliw because yung teacher na gumawa nito, kinokopya talaga nila yung mannerisms ng teacher. Alam naman ninyo ang grade 2, no? They'll really copy. And so they were copying the mannerisms of the teacher, but it was really in context application because it was their own books that they were reading, but they were using the skills for this. Okay? So I'd like to go to the slide on grasps. Franco. I just like to talk to you a little bit about grasps kasi you use grasps for your performance tasks, right? And you all know what that is: goal, role, audience, situation, product, and standards. That's 2 slides down, Franco. But the grasps, it's like, why are you using the grasps, right? Um, you're just using it because yun yung, for many of you, you're just using it kasi yun yung formula na binigay sa inyo for PETA, di ba? But you're using this kasi sinabi ko, di ba, in context. That's like the basketball player. So ano yung context? 1 minute left. Ito yung sitwasyon. Wala yung best player namin. Ang layo ko sa etc. So yun yung context. That's what the grasps is for. So that you know if that your students can apply it in a certain role, for a certain audience, in a certain situation. So in this slide, you can see in the picture, let us say that you are asking the students to introduce themselves to in a paragraph, right? If your context is introduce yourself, you are applying for a job, dapat iba ang pagkasulat ng estudyante versus introduce yourself, may bago kang barkada, inintroduce ka ng mga pinsan mo sa kanyang friend, at so dapat iba yun, di ba? That's the context. And that's where you can see the student using, making wise use, strategic use, thinking, meaning making, sense making about how is it good for me to use this, what I've learned in this particular situation. The last shift in practice is, instead of simple performance, we will do complex performance. Next slide. Okay, so this is the third one, and we're just going to do from simple performance to complex performance. So Father Johnny and I made a grid of simple to complex performance and easy to difficult subject matter. So if you look at the grid, you will see that we're making a distinction between whether subject matter is easy or difficult. Iba yon sa simple ba o complex ba ang task, ang PETA. Okay? So PETAs should be complex, not simple. Let me explain. All right. So for example, can you just click, Franco? Okay. For example, enumerate the parts of a living cell. Simple lang yon, simpleng subject matter kasi it's just parts of the cell. Ang pinapagawa ng teacher, simple din kasi enumerate lang. Many of you might think blooms. Okay, that's fine. You can think of blooms. Lower level, enumerate the parts of a living cell. We are discouraging simple performance all the time. Somewhere in your unit, you need to have complex performance. The example is the one that's on the screen now about mean, median, and mode. So considered easy topic yun. In fact, that's already taught in grade school. Up to high school, that's still taught. But a complex performance that you might give in junior high or in late elementary is, when is it best to use mean, median, and mode to represent measures of central tendency? So kung topic ng mean, median, and mode, ang easy subject matter dun is find the mean, median, and mode of the following numbers. Simple performance lang yon. Pero kung sabihin ninyo, explain, when is it best to use mean, median, and mode? And give an example, mas complex na yung performance, maski same subject matter pa lang siya. Okay? The other example you see here is write a paragraph using active and passive verbs. So that's a topic that many students find hard, active and passive voice. But if you will just tell them to write a simple paragraph that is difficult subject matter but simple performance. So hindi ibig sabihin na to na mahirap yung subject matter, so ibig sabihin complex na yung task ko. Hindi. Ang pinapagawa lang dito is write a paragraph. Okay? So it's still simple performance. The last example here, how does a city's geography affect the culture and economy? Yan, difficult topic yan. And complex performance. All right? So if you're, I'd like to just give an example that I hope will drive home the point. Now, next slide, please. This is for a topic in engineering. And guess what? It's for kindergarten, okay? Next, that one. So the topic is stages of the engineering design process. It's for kindergarten, for STEM. Kindergarten, pwede ba yan? And so the teacher's thinking, stages of the engineering design process, and the application is so that they will be able to identify and propose a solution to a family or school problem. Okay, so let me show you. Next slide, please. So this is the engineering process, right? Find a problem to be solved, brainstorm the solution, make a prototype. Okay, so ito yung ginawa ng teacher. Read the story of the 3 billy goats graph. Natatandaan ba ninyo yung kwento na yan, di ba? So yung 3 goats, inubos na nila lahat yung damo dun sa hill. So wala na, brown na siya, wala na silang makakain na damo. Pero sa kabilang mountain, sa kabilang bundok, hill, meron pang madami pang grass. But it is separated by a river. So now the engineering problem is, how do we get to the other hill? How do we get to the hill on the other side when there's a river in between? So yun yung engineering problem, right? So they brainstormed their solution. Next slide, please. So some students said boat. Some students said bridge. Okay, so nag-drawing sila, kinder, let's not forget kinder. So, nag-drawing sila ng bridge at boat. Yung mga may gustong boat, boat. Yung mga may gustong bridge, gumawa sila ng bridge. Okay? Tapos, build and test. I think they made it out of lollipops, popsicle sticks, right? And then, so they had some kind of way to build and test it. And then, of course, the final slide was choose the best solution, right? And this was really a display of a kindergarten STEM class that I took this picture in San Diego, California. I was able to visit the school. Next slide, please, Franco. And if you will look at the problem of the 3 billy goat graph, it is easy subject matter. It's about the story. But it's very complex performance. They really use the engineering process without making it overwhelming for the students. So that's what you want to do. You want to help your students think at high levels. Okay? So next slide, please. We'll skip the next 2, Franco. There. So ito yung task natin, di ba, earlier about of all your waking hours, how much time is spent on media and screen entertainment. Where will you put it on the grid? Ratio and proportion can be difficult subject matter, right? But we can just give them the worksheets. If we just ended it at the worksheet, it would be simpler performance. Of course, pwede natin gawing mahirap yung problem sa worksheet. So, aangat siya ng konti. But as far as complex thinking is involved, this kind of PETA will really get you to more complex performance. So, to summarize, next slide, please. There are also 3 shifts in learning through action. And these deal mostly with your assessments. Think of application. Think of what action your students should be able to do outside your classroom based on the content you're teaching. And think of ways that they can apply it during your unit. not just at the end of the unit, or not even worse, not just someday mga bata, kakailanganin ninyo ito. Hindi pwedeng ganun, di ba? Alright, number 2, instead of out of context, in context application, in a situation. That's why you have your grasps. And try to get them from simple performance to complex performance. Okay, so I'll end my presentation there and turn it over to Franco.
Thank you, Miss Rita, for that walkthrough once again. And Father Johnny, welcome back to the stream. Okay. So teachers, we're now going to open the floor for questions. If you have questions for Father Johnny, although as earlier, we have a lot of already insights, no, and some statements from our teachers, okay, in the audience. Okay, teachers, please do paste, no, your questions in our chat right now if you have concerns or other inquiries, no, to our speakers for today. By the way, would like to invite you to purchase the book. Many people have stated their interest on purchasing the book. We have pasted the link to the Shopee and Lazada link, no, for you to purchase the Learning by Refraction by Father Janigo and Miss Rita Atienza. It's really a good investment, no, in learning more about the 21st century pedagogy. Okay. Father Johnny and Miss Rita, while we're waiting for questions from the audience, I actually have some questions, no, that I have also prepared, okay, for our panel discussion. Okay. And the first question I'd like to ask, no, when we're talking about 21st century education, is that one of the hardest thing, perhaps, no, that grapples the teachers right today, no, when it comes to pivoting and shifting to 21st century education is the content. So how important is curriculum auditing, and what is maybe the best way to go about it? Because some of our educators and teachers are so attached, okay, to the content we're teaching. Because again, as mentioned by Fathers Johnny earlier, we're experts in our field, and that's one thing that we really are good at, delivering our content. Maybe Father Johnny first.
Okay, so thank you for your question, Franco. I think the first thing I want to say is that I think the teacher has to realize that content is not the main ingredient, no, in learning and teaching, because no matter how good our content is, if we're not able to create the conditions or design the learning experience in such a way that the students can avail of it, then it's not really helpful. So the first factor, I think, is the desire of the teacher to change, no, to because in my own experience also, especially when we were pivoting to online, we saw that attachment, no, the teachers felt they were not doing their job if they do not cover all the content, no, even if we tell them that even if you cover all the content, it's not going to be learned, no. And remember what Rita was saying, it's all about learning, not teaching, no. So even if you taught everything, if they didn't learn half of it, what's the point, right? So so that's the thing. The second thing is, I'm not sure if all teachers have a say in the curriculum, no, because as we know, we have supervisors, we have the school heads and the dep ed and all that, so that also comes into play. I don't know, Rita, what you can add to what I said.
Maybe my advice to the audience is to think about priorities. Okay, look at all. If you think about spending the same amount of time for everything that you're accountable for in the milks, baka hindi talaga pwede. But what you can do is prioritize which ones there are the most important. Which ones can you just mention or spend 10 minutes on versus which ones you need to spend 2 hours on. I think as teacher designer, you shouldn't give up that very important design decision. What are you going to spend most of your time on? Sa totoo lang, kunyari daw you have 2 weeks for one unit at bumagyo, hindi mo rin mauubos. At saka kung minsan ang dami-dami, hindi mo talaga matatapos, di ba? So parang iniiwan mo na lang to fate. Sorry na lang, yung dulo, hindi ko na siya magagawa, di ba? Usually in math, it's statistics. The fourth quarter, teachers leave it for fourth quarter. Sorry na lang kung hindi ko maabutan. But it's important. Why don't you make the choice about what you must be able to finish and what are the things that you will still cover, but maybe you will just mention it, not spend so much time on it. That might be one way to approach it.
Thank you, Miss Rita and Father Johnny, no, for that response. I think that's one of the things that actually sometimes hold back our teachers in really embracing the 21st century education. Okay, when we Sir Jambi, Teacher Pauno, if you have other questions, just let us know. No, I'll ask also again my other question, Father Johnny and Miss Rita, as we transition back to like a hyperflex. I really like that term, Miss Rita earlier, or the hybrid learning. Okay, what are some of the things that we have learned, no, in this pandemic? Okay? And well, of course, no, also from your implementation to the ADL that you think can be adopted, okay, or can be transitioned in a face-to-face setup. Maybe Miss Rita, we can start with you.
Compassion for the learner, because di talaga nila kaya eh. If their mind, I was talking to a teacher, okay, she teaches in one university and she teaches in University A and University B. Okay, I won't name the universities, okay. In University B, they have this, they're very strict, they're very, they have so much content to cover. The teachers there, yun ang kultura nila. Ang dami-daming content, i-cover. Okay? So bago siya sa university na yon, di ba? And in University B, they don't have that culture, but they have a culture of really working with their students to make sure they learn. And so she's a practitioner in advertising. And so this is a communications course. And in that university where it's all content, her students don't even want to participate in a discussion. Parang, wag nang discussion. Ang dami-daming gagawin. Parang nagmamadali lang sila. They're only after finishing. In that other university, she has the richest discussions with her students. So that alone will already tell you that if they are not in the frame of mind of learning and they're just really struggling to stay afloat, no learning will happen. The other one is really a coaching mindset from the teacher. Because you really want learning. Sana matuto ang mga students.
Yeah, I concur with what Rita said. No, especially in this pandemic, I think compassion was purposefully set as a way of proceeding. Eh. Kasi mental health is so important. Without mental health, no, without well-being, learning cannot happen. No, if for example somebody gets sick in the house, we cannot expect our students to keep up, diba? So we have to really be compassionate. But having said that, as we are preparing to go back to face, the principles remain the same. Eh. Parang I think the one thing that we hope we have learned is what Rita was saying earlier. It's not about content, no. When I was studying as a kid, our school was disrupted twice, no. Martial law and the EDSA revolution. We missed a lot of class hours. Pinasa lang kami. So I think we did okay. Diba? So even if we missed out half the content or, we did okay. Why? Because I think we learned how to learn. No? And that's the one thing that human teachers can teach that machines cannot. So if we waste our time in class just giving them something that computers can give them or the internet, what's the point? Diba? You're going to become irrelevant. So I think to embrace our uniqueness as human teachers, no, there are so many things we can do that Google cannot do, no, And what Rita was saying about, engaging the students in rich discussions, the computer can't do that, no? But the classroom is an excellent place for students to learn how to think, no? To learn how to evaluate ideas, no? Which are things that they can use in the real world. So I think I think the lessons we learned in the pandemic will serve us well when we go back face to face. I hope it won't be back to business, no? If we learn to be more interactive, to be better designers, I hope we will not just go back to the usual, no? Yeah.
Sir Jambi?
Ayan. Thank you, Sir Franco. May question lang po ako kay Miss Rita and kay Father Johnny. Like yung sinishare po kanina ni Miss Rita kasi I think that is a reality talaga. Yung si University A and University B. Kumaga, much as the teacher would like to apply these strategies, minsan nakakulong din tayo dun sa sistema dun sa school na pinapasukan. So since many of our viewers, marami po sa ating mga kaagapay ay public school teachers who are ultimately under the Department of Education. Kung anong sasabihin ng Department of Education, would you have what's one thing that you would recommend to the Department of Education when post-pandemic? Ayan po.
Okay, maybe I can go ahead.
Father Johnny?
I think there are a lot of good things that are being done, no, in any school, in the Department of Education, the public schools. But as in all institutions, laging may constraints, di ba? May limitations, no. But I always tell educators that true innovation is creativity within constraints. The truly innovative people are those who are able to be creative despite the constraints. Kung creative ka lang, kasi walang constraints, or kung creative ka lang pero hindi naman nag-work dahil may constraints, hindi ka innovative, di ba? So, I think that all of us have to outsmart the system. Now, there are many good things about the system. There are also many constraints. So to become truly innovative, we have to be creative given the possibilities. So we have to be more realistic. Kasi one reaction will be, there's no point kasi ang daming constraints, ang daming limitations. There's no point trying to be better, no? The other extreme naman is to be a dreamer and say, I want to do this, and just end up being frustrated. I think we have to be very realistic. We have to be very grounded and say, okay, I have to look for the opportunities within all the limits and constraints to be creative. So if I want to become a 21st century teacher, there are certain things I can't do, but I might be able to find other things I can do, no? Yung mga examples ni Rita, those are of course ideal, right? You can't always have a say about assessment, but I'm sure if you look for it, you will find it, no? You will find kahit na isa lang, even if it's just one for the semester or one for the year, if it's really difficult, no? I think, as I said earlier, what's important is not perfection, not perfectly becoming a 21st century learner, but progressing towards it. If we give up on trying to progress towards it because we want to be perfect, we'll never do anything. Kawawa yung mga students natin. Rita?
I think the DepEd, in moving to remote learning, the DepEd did so many helpful things. Like first, the milks. They really, I mean, just the fact that they officially decongested the curriculum. First as a guide, but also as a signal. For me, that was really powerful and it was responsive. I think they have tried to be very responsive, even the, moving the school year. Even if it's far from ideal, as Father Johnny said, within the constraints, at least it was responsiveness, no? So I guess we need to just wait for what are their guidelines. I'm sure they'll come up with some set guidelines. I think they said they would release some guidelines starting next week and in the weeks to follow. So I'm sure they will try and help out. And maybe for the teacher, just find, as Father Johnny said, some entry points. Entry points, or low-hanging fruit is the other word that they call it. Parang yung pinakamadaling gawin just as a start. Tapos siguro manganganak na yung efforts ninyo. But start by, oh, okay, this is my advice to the teachers. Start by diagnosing where your students are. So, papasok sila, kunyari, grade 6. Ano yung material ng grade 4 at 5 na hindi talaga nila, natutunan? Baka you have to do some bridging there. So, yeah, maybe that.
Thank you, Ms. Rita, for that answer. And also to Father Johnny. Father Johnny and Ms. Rita, there's a question from our audience. This is from teacher Manolito White. Okay. This is a difference. What is the main difference between IPP or the Ignatian Pedagogy from IPP, which is individualized program planning?
It's very different, no? I mean, they're both different frameworks, no? There might be overlaps in the strategies, no? I'm not. I mean, I went to a school in high school that was individualized instruction. I'm not sure if it's similar or the same, no? It's a completely different framework. Although I would think there are overlaps, no. The one thing I want to say about Ignatian pedagogy is that it's not something original, no. It's really, curating the best strategies, the best practices out there, and putting them together, no, and making them more how do you say, cohesive. Because the problem is many educators like the so-called, flavors of the month, no, the trends, right? There are always trends in education, no? When I was growing up, when I was a kid in high school, uh, individualized instruction, which is probably similar to individual program planning, was the main thing that people were trying to, not too many people, but our school was trying to do, no. So but what's nice about Ignatian pedagogy is that it's able to give us an umbrella framework to work, and then to be able to still beg and borrow whatever best strategies and practices are out there.
Indeed. Thank you, Father Johnny. Ms. Rita, would you like to add something, or are we good with that?
I
Okay.
didn't grow up in a Jesuit school, and I didn't teach in a Jesuit school until I taught in Ateneo in the university in 2006. So unlike Father Johnny, who grew up in and many of the, let's say, the teachers in Xavier, um, I sometimes look at it as an outsider, and so the impact on me is really tremendous. I think it's such a powerful framework, and two elements that I really, really love are reflection and action. And the fact that they are insisting that, as Father Johnny said, um, times evolve and our learners evolve. So nag-iiba-iba ang best practices, but reflection and action should always remain. That the teacher must find ways to make the students reflect and then think of the application.
Thank you, Ms. Rita, okay, for that. Maybe this is going to be the last question po, teachers, okay, so that we can proceed with the last part of our session for today. Okay, this is again from Miss Teacher Manolito White Oligo. Okay, so and it's actually an appropriate question to end the panel discussion. Okay, what is your advice to teachers who will adopt the refractive learning or the framework of learning by refraction? Ms. Rita, you may want to go first.
When we were writing the book, it was actually Father Johnny's idea to make it like it should be something like a workbook, he said, so that talagang magagamit. We really want it to be useful. So it is not written like a very theoretical book, although we, of course, did not leave out the theories and the research and the that form the foundation of the things that we put in the book. But it's more of a practitioner's guide, as the title suggests. So it was designed so that it helps to read it in the sequence. But if you, as a practicing teacher, you can also look at parts that you are want to start with. If you want to start with reflection, let's say, and read that. So maybe that's my advice to teachers who will adopt refractive learning. Look for the part that interests you, whether it's because it's your strength, because it's something you are not good at, or something your students really need. Just look for any place to start in the book. That might be one way to do it.
And I agree with Rita. Pick whatever you think will help. Forget about whatever won't help you. No, so your context is important. But I just like to add that my advice will be use your judgment. No, we don't know your context. We don't know your school. We don't know your students. You are the expert of your schools. You are the expert of the subject you're teaching to your students. No, you know them best. So trust your judgment, make your judgment. No, so don't be afraid to make those decisions. In other words, rely on your own what we call wisdom of practice. No, we all accumulate wisdom from our practice of teaching. So all of us in this virtual room are very wise because of our experiences. No, so draw from your wisdom of practice.
Thank you, Father Johnny, with for those and also to Miss Rita. Okay, so teachers, we are now closing the panel discussion, and we'll now actually proceed now to, of course, we'd like to also show our appreciation to our two great speakers for today, and we would like to do that by presenting our certificate of appreciation. Teacher Pao, would you like to do the honor of reading the citation for our two speakers for today?
Yes, of course, Teacher Franco. So this afternoon, we are really very blessed to have with us two esteemed speakers and actually really practitioners in the field of education. So we present the certificate of appreciation to Father Johnny Go, SJ, for sharing his knowledge and expertise in the recently concluded webinar entitled Learning by Refraction, a Practitioner's Guide to 21st Century Ignatian Pedagogy, awarded on November 6, 2021, to be signed by the Kaagapay administrators, Sir Jambi, myself, Sir Jello, and Sir Franco. Likewise, this certificate is presented to Dr. Rita Atienza for sharing also her expertise. We are very blessed to have you this afternoon. Thank you so much po.
Again, thank you, Father Johnny and Miss Rita, for spending your time and your expertise. Now, maybe before we end, we would like to ask some words of encouragement to our teachers as we continue the second pandemic school year, and as well as we transition back into a face-to-face setup. Father Johnny?
So siguro short lang, sa mga kaagapay natin, we did not come this far only to get this far. No? Ang daming challenges last year, and we were able to survive and learn so much. So that's not what we're about. No, we need to learn more. We continue to learn. We continue to improve our craft because of our love for our students. So all the best to everyone. God bless everyone.
Um, um, you're, you've done a good job. I think we have all done a good job. A great job, even if we didn't know what we are doing. And it's only our love for our students that sort of made us know what to do. So continue loving your students. They need you. And therefore, you must take care of yourself, because you can't help your students if you yourself are already in a really bad place. So take care of yourself also.
Thank you po. Maraming salamat, Father Johnny and Miss Rita. Teachers, okay, let's show our appreciation as well in the chat. Okay, send our thanks to our two great speakers for today. Maraming salamat po, Father Johnny and Miss Rita. Papaalam na po tayo sa ating dalawang speakers for today.
Salamat.
Okay. So, admins, thank you. Ating teachers. Ramdam niyo yung ngayon lang ako nakahinga ng ano.
Pwede ka na huminga. Yun talaga, pwede ka na huminga.
Oo. Pero sobra. Di ba yung... Grabe. By the way, teachers, we'll be posting again the links in the chat right now. Okay? This is the link to Lazada for the Learning by Refraction for those who are interested to buy the book. Ang mura lang ng book, no? Grabe. Tapos ang dami na yan.
Grabe, ang bilis ni Sir Jello.
Sir Jello. Oo, I'm posting again. That's the one in Lazada. This one is in Shopee. So please do check it out. No, I think teacher Sir Jello, I think the price is 295, tama ba ako?
Yes,
Yes,
295. So,
295.
295.
295 lang yan, Sir Jello. Ang laki niya.
Oo. Kasi sobrang ano niya malaman, tsaka ang daming pwedeng ang dami niyang talagang ang dami ng notes ni Sir Jello.
kasi
Anyway,
may
so
post-it siya.
oo, may post-it na yun. No? So, please do check it out, teachers, yung book ni Father Johnny, no? And Miss Rita Atienza on learning by refraction. Kay Sir Jambi, Teacher Pao, Sir Jello, kumusta ang ating reactions, insights, anything? Natameme tayong lahat, syempre.
Tameme tayo
Ah,
lahat.
ako,
Yun
ako,
nga.
ako unang reaction ko, Sir Franco,
Oh.
parang ayoko na magsalita next Saturday.
Ang hirap sundan nito, no? Pero sa totoo lang, actually, kaya dapat nila talaga ding bilhin yung book, no? Kasi what actually Father Johnny and Miss Rita actually did was just to give us like an overview of what the book is all about, okay? Pero ang dami mong pwede pang i-unearth at pwede mo pang makuha dun sa book, no? Kasi you can actually go as deeper, no? And perhaps, in talaga isa sa pinaka magandang aspect, no? The book itself, no? The title itself, Learning by Refraction, okay? Is yung idea of refracting skills, knowledge na hindi lang siya ina-absorb o hindi lang siya binabalik, no? Kasi usually ganun yung nangyayari, diba? Yung nire-reflect lang yung learning, parang tawag natin na minsan nire-regurgitate lang yung information. Pero yung sa concept ni Father Johnny, no, tsaka Miss Rita is about refracting, no? Like using it something else, or redirecting the learning itself, no? Or what they have acquired, no? Whatever knowledge or skills they have acquired. Siguro yung pinakamagandang aspect talaga that I got from our talk for today.
Yes, ako actually, medyo struggle yung internet ko, no? So, meron atang mga 5-second lag ata yung internet ko, no? Sa lahat ba naman ng araw, ano? But syempre, hindi ko hahayaan na mawala yung opportunity, no? To interact with Father Johnny and Miss Rita. They actually, yung question ko actually for them was the inspiration. And with what Miss Rita has actually shared with us na the book that they wrote is actually what do you call this? It's practical. You know, it's workbook. Diba? It's
Workbook nga,
actually a
totoo.
workbook. Yan, diba? Na
Yes.
talagang magagamit mo. Kasi I'm sure our teachers, marami na silang binabasang libro eh. Diba? The book that they have, they have a lot of theoretical books, but how do you really apply it? No, how do you really apply it? And having that in hand and na-share din naman nila. So ang ganda, 'di ba? Meron ng explanation, nagsalita na yung libro, tapos babasahin mo
Oo.
siya ulit. So it's very good, no? Kasi naintindihan mo ano ba yung naging context ng dalawang authors natin in writing that book. So it's very refreshing, no? Parang buo yung pag-aaral natin nung learning by refraction. So
Correct.
I'm really happy.
May direction na kagad. Pag binasa mo, alam mo na kagad yung pupuntahan. But tama si Teacher Pao na Sir Jamin, Sir Jello. I think the best thing about the book is that it's real life. Base talaga sa context natin. Hindi siya yung theory na minsan hindi mo malaman kung paano mo to i-apply or paano mo to magagamit. Father Johnny, no, and Miss Rita actually work really hard on putting the Philippine context in mind, no, while they're producing and conceptualizing the entire book. Okay? According to Sister Navarro, it's 333 pesos plus delivery charge. Mukhang nagpa-book na si Sister Monica na ng book natin, okay?
Malapit na 11-11. May
Pwede nyo
Yes, no.
Oo nga, 11-11. May
Oo.
cashback pa yan. Free shipping.
Yes.
Diba?
So please, teachers, no, that's a very, very good investment. That's also one of the ways na to also really spread yung knowledge nila kasi kung mabibili natin yung magagamit natin, we can actually apply it in our own class. By the way, while we are at it na, habang nagkukwentuhan po kami, we'd like to also invite you on our next session next Thursday on impactful technology use and models of technology integration. We will have I don't know, our speaker, okay, from South Louisiana, okay, Miss Bonnie Shelley. And ano, by the way, no, kaka-promote lang niya, nasa Division of Education na siya ngayon. Si Miss Bonnie, no, my mentor, she's no longer teaching in the classroom. She's now guiding other teachers, okay, in her in South Louisiana. Okay? She made sure that I make sure na South Louisiana, no? Kasi magkaiba pa pala yun, South and North Louisiana. Anyway, sa teachers, no, please do join us on Thursday. And of course, kay, para po habang nakikinig kayo sa aming kwentuhan, okay, we're also going to give you now your evaluation link. Please do check if it works, okay? And you can actually access our evaluation. Okay? Siyan. Okay. And of course, no, Teacher Sir Jambi, no, Sir Jello and Teacher Pau, talagang ano to, dream come true. By the way, baka lang hindi alam din ng context ng mga teachers, no, bakit ako sobrang kinakabahan sa session na to is that Father Janigo used to be our school president, okay? Actually, school director, no, at that time, okay, in Xavier School. And perhaps isa sa mga tao talagang ano siya, no, visionary. Okay? Pag pinag-uusapan natin, no, Father Janigo never thinks like in 1 year or in 2 years time. Okay? Laging nakatingin si Father Johnny, no, in like 5 years, 10 years time, or even 20 years into the future. That's the reason why if you read that book, you will not only read it in this context, you will actually see education being projected in the next 5 years or 10 years. That's the kind of mind Father Johnny has, no? At sabi ko kay Sir Jambi kanina habang nag-usap kami sa chat kanina, napaka-hypnotic talagang pakinggan ni Father Johnny, no? Yung ang daling maintindihan ng mga concept na pinapaliwanag niya. Sabi nga ni Sir Jambi kanina sa background is that some of the concepts we already know. Most probably we'll talk about that in KTS, pero the way he presented it and the way he explained it and the way Father Johnny elaborated it, no, speaks like so much clarity na naniniwala ka talaga at maiintindihan mo talaga yung ano. Ayan, nagko-compare na yung mga teachers natin sa price. Meron daw 295 with shipping na. Okay, so sa Shopee Pay po, sa Shopee daw tayo yata. Kailangan may Shopee Pay according to Miss Miyuki Madeline. Okay? We'll also be ordering soon, no, that book at isa sa maganda sigurong resource na pwede natin ibigay sa ating mga teachers. Okay? Soon, siguro sa December, no? One of the gifts na pwede nating ibigay sa ating mga teachers. Okay? So, Sir Jello, si Sir Jello mukhang tahimik, no? Sir Jello, kumusta? Go ahead, Sir Jello.
Siguro ayun nga, sabi mo nga Sir Franco, ayun, habang binabasa kasi nung sa background na chat namin, talagang ano, parang pag si Father Johnny na kasi nung nagsalita, parang may kinig ka na lang, may inspire ka na lang, gagawin mo na, parang ganun no feeling. Yun nga,
Yes.
like what Sir Franco have mentioned, I think I was new during that time that nandun pa siya. And talaga nung vision niya, very, very, ano talaga, parang, I remember the book was released, pre-pandemic, but the content is actually something that can be used even after post-pandemic. So, sobrang nung
Yes.
vision niya, talagang ano. And, what I like about really in that talk that Father Johnny and Miss Rita have mentioned is yung thought, parang parating may Ignatian ano pa rin, may Ignatian flavor pa rin pag ng talk nila na whatever you have or whatever you will be reading in the book, use it on your own context. Those you don't need, you can forget that. So, hindi ibig sabihin hindi siya something na very rigid na ito dapat sundin. Kung applicable sa konteksto, if you can use that, yun nga, sabi nga, practical wisdom or ng teaching wisdom natin, if you think that those things can be very useful, di ba? Why not use it? If not, then okay, you can move forward and try to look for things that will help. But I think the learning by refraction is really, really helpful, especially that we're looking forward to the new normal or to the new setup that we will be having, the high flex learning. I want that term.
High
High flex.
flex, oo. Gusto ko yung term na high flex 'no, high
Uh,
flex learning.
yeah.
Okay, anyway, pero alam mo sabi yung maganda rin sabi ni Father kanina is that sana hindi lang tayo bumalik sa dati. Kasi
Yeah.
baka may gano'n tayong ano, tendency na we're just going to go back to what it was once before 'no. I think, pero feeling ko rin baka hindi na rin talaga siya mag-work, okay, kahit papilitin mo. So it will become a futile attempt 'no, to just reinstate 'no, everything that was before or pre-pandemic. Kasi kahit yung mindset ng mga students natin, baka hindi na rin tanggapin, yung gano'ng klase ng approach 'no. So it will be very dangerous both for the, teachers and also the students 'no. So let's try to of course 'no, move forward, okay, with everything that we have learned. Sabi nga ni Father Go kanina, ang dami po nating natutunan, 'wag nating sayangin. Ano sabi niya kanina, if I recall it correctly, Sir Jambi, we didn't go this far to just go this far. Tama ba ako? If I'm not, kung na-quote ko ba siya ng maayos dun sa statement niya. Okay? So, move forward, teachers. Okay? Tuloy-tuloy po tayo. Okay? So, any other reminders, insights, admins, kay Teacher Pao, Sir Jambi? Are we good?
Nalalaban talaga yung internet ko.
Oo
Pero
nga eh.
sobrang saya ko, no, to have heard it from
Galing
Father
din
John.
nagsasalita si Teacher Pao. No?
Oh, naka-freeze yung video ni Teacher Pao ngayon.
Nakakainis talaga. Sige,
Parang kang
pakinggan
ano,
ko na
parang
lang.
kang ano yan, yung mga nagpa-puppet.
Nakakainis.
Hindi sync yung ano ni Teacher Pao ngayon, hindi sync yung yung video sa audio. Well, Teacher Eliza will post it in a while. Okay, may nag-request po ng link natin. Okay. Hold on. Okay, for a while. Okay. Sir Eliza, posted na po. Okay. So, teachers, admins, maraming salamat. Kay teachers, maraming salamat for joining us this afternoon. Okay. And again, we'll see you again on Thursday for the third installment of our November series. Okay. So, maraming salamat po.